You are one of the least known, most impressive people in the Valley. You rewrote Google Maps in a weekend because you thought it sucked.
I love to work. Best way to predict the future is to invent it. And that is like my operating principle. I am extremely passionate about Sierra. I think we'll probably see the first $1 trillion software as a service company come out of this era. The reason for it is that these AI agents actually are doing jobs rather than just adding productivity enhancement. And I think that value is so quantifiable. After I left Salesforce, by coincidence, ChatGPT came out right then. I would be building open source software if not running a company right now. I just want to work in the technology and help shape it because it's the most exciting technology of my memory, and I want to play a part in shaping how we all use it.
Welcome to Grit. I'm Joubin, partner at Kleiner Perkins, a show where we go beyond the highlight reel and explore the personal and professional challenges of building history-making companies. Today on Grit, we have Bret Taylor, co-founder of Sierra, an AI-native startup reimagining how businesses connect with customers. However, Bret is probably one of the most illustrious and under-known guests that I have ever had. He started FriendFeed and sold that to Facebook. Within a few weeks, became the CTO of Facebook. He was the chair of Twitter during all of the drama. He then started another company that got acquired by Salesforce. Within a few years, he became the co-CEO of Salesforce with Benioff. And now he's back to ground zero, starting another company. We talk about why he made the leap back to early stage startups, what it means to be in the eye of the AI hurricane, and what he's learned from a career at the center of it all. Enjoy the episode. It's interesting because you have a real way of timing these boards. I'm curious. You were on the board and the chair of OpenAI. When it's all happening, like Sam's getting, we don't even know. I still don't actually know what's happening.
Well, I wasn't there when I was brought in to mediate.
To mediate. Yeah.
So
for better or worse, you know. And then all of the stuff that happens with Twitter. When you go home, when you put your laptop down and you go home that night for dinner, do you ask yourself, how the hell did a kid from the East Bay, who still lives in the East Bay, get caught up in this stuff?
It is crazy. But, part of it's like the OpenAI thing was a choice because it was in crisis and I agreed to come in and help put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So that one was I just cared a lot about OpenAI. It was interesting. I was never going to do a board again. And my wife was like, are you really going to regret helping OpenAI from collapsing, on your deathbed? And I was like, whose side are you on, honey? So that's part of it's just life is complicated and to do impactful things, you can't run away from complexity. So you just got to put on your big boy pants and make hard decisions and compartmentalize. So, yeah.
Do you get a call from somebody that's hey, this, you said Humpty Dumpty, putting Humpty Dumpty back together, which is a funny phrasing for it. This is happening and you have to be, if somebody calls me with that, the first question that I would ask, not being you, is why me? Why are you calling me to put this thing back together? Is that how you reacted?
I had an intuition why they called me. I mean, I think there's a running joke that I'm the board fixer. I'm not sure it's a reputation I sought out, but it's a reputation I have. I had actually chatted in the past with Sam and a couple members of the board about maybe joining the board, and I said no because I just wanted to focus on Sierra, my startup, and I wasn't really sure I wanted to spend a lot of time on boards, in general. And then when that Thursday or Friday, when Sam got fired, I ended up getting a call actually from one of the board members saying, essentially relaying that, they were trying to figure out a path forward and would I be willing to help. So then I called up Sam and,
And you knew Sam?
I knew Sam. I knew Adam D'Angelo.
Yep.
He was also a CTO of Facebook. I knew Cora. Um, so I called Sam and basically wanted sort of his side of the story because I knew it was a messy situation, and I just knew if I was going to put myself in the middle of it, I wanted to know what I was getting into. And both the board and Sam reflected like, yeah, we'd like you to help, which was interesting just because it was obviously a complicated situation. And I was just reflecting, like, I'm not sure there was a long list of people that both Sam and the board probably could mutually agree upon to help. And so it felt, I don't know if this is true. Like if I had said no, what would have happened? I don't know. But I was a little bit anxious that if I said no, there wasn't going to be a person that could come in and help try to mediate a solution there. And, you know, if you talk to any entrepreneur who's making an AI startup now, none of us would be in this position if not for OpenAI. I think, I'm sure like the scaling that OpenAI did after the Transformers paper, someone might have done it, but ChatGPT caught the consciousness of the world and sort of created the moment we're in now. And so for me, I was just like, gosh, if I can play a part in helping this quirky nonprofit research lab that has somehow captured the attention of the world and I can help it not collapse, that's a pretty good use of my time. And so I just decided that I was like, you know, I was in a unique position of being at least somewhat trusted. I don't want to speak on behalf of everyone involved, but at least, you know, considered a high integrity person who could help figure it out. And I was worried. I mean, you know, that weekend there's that letter from employees, like the vast majority of them saying they're
going to quit, right? If he left.
Yeah. And it was just sort of like, man, this thing was about to collapse. I mean, I don't know. It's hard. You can't A/B test your life decisions, right? So, you know, maybe it wouldn't have, but it sort of felt like as an outsider that it was going to collapse. And I didn't want it to. I thought this was one of the most remarkable organizations of all time. Who would have thought 5 years ago that, you know, large scale AI would come out of a independent research lab, not one of the large incumbents, right? No one would have predicted that except maybe Sam and Greg and the OpenAI team. And I just wanted to play a part in helping it exist. And so that's why I did it.
Yeah. And when you were thinking about help, was your idea of help getting Sam back in the business when you were entering, or did you not exactly know, like was saving the company getting Sam back in your mind at that point?
At that point, my view, because I was like just reading what everyone else was reading. I had the same information you had. At that point, the employees, at least from that letter, had indicated like, we don't understand what happened. And, you know, we demand a reset effectively. That's how I read it.
Yeah.
And to move forward. So when Larry Summers and I sort of reconstituted the board with Adam D'Angelo, we started by just basically saying, let's do a reset. Sam comes back, and then we'll do a review and do something, I would say, a fairly independent review of what happened, and then decide in a way that hopefully people would broadly interpret as like proper due process. And so I went in intentionally with an open mind, not saying like, this is what happened or this is what didn't happen, because I didn't know and no one knew, but I wanted to reset it and then have something like when Larry and I sort of did that review, we wanted proper due process. So whatever decision that we came to based on collecting the facts, you know, OpenAI and its stakeholders, which is basically the world, would be like, hey, I might not agree with every decision, but you did the process with integrity. And that's what we tried to do.
And at the time, you're coming off the heels of all of the stuff that had just happened with Twitter and Elon. And then you're doing your own startup, right? Like this is in the middle of you building a brand new startup off of the ground. Like those are all happening basically in parallel, if not close sequence. Is that right?
Yeah.
Crazy.
I was, you know, in September of the previous year, I was co-CEO of Salesforce and chairman of Twitter. And then you fast forward, you know, like a little over a year and this was happening, and I had started my own company and now this happened. So yeah, it's like a lot in time, a lot of these things happen in quick succession.
This is maybe a naive question, but do you feel the feeling of overwhelmed? Like, do you even experience overwhelmed internally?
I'm sure I do, but I'm good in a foxhole, like I don't freak out. What I always try to do is, and I'm not always perfect at it, by the way, what I try to do is basically take a breath, take a step back, analyze the situation and say, like, what's the most important thing I can do right now? And you always try to think about the long term and the short term. And in general, I do feel overwhelmed. I do feel anxious, but I don't feel them as overwhelming emotions. I try to channel those emotions into taking action. And I think we're capable. I think people in general are capable of a lot, and sometimes we, whether it's imposter syndrome or just like emotions, because, sucks to have bad things happen and you can let those emotions overwhelm you and cloud your judgment. I think it's like exercise. Like the more you're in complex situations, the more when you're presented with one, you can kind of dispassionately, maybe is like overstating it, but as dispassionately as possible, figure out, okay, what am I going to do? And I've just had I don't know if it's good fortune, but I've been in a lot of complex situations in my career. So like the more I am, the more I'm not like underwater and overwhelmed when something like that happens. The more you can react to it as, hey, like we'll get through this. Like we just need to figure out a path from point A to point B.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't want to pretend I'm like, immune to emotions or something like that. But I've my experiences have developed the calluses that you need to deal with these complex situations and not freak the fuck out.
Yeah, I think it's totally fair. I mean, the reason I ask is because like if you did, like I can't imagine a series of things that would evoke the emotion of overwhelmed more than the sequence of things that you have gone through over the last couple of years.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes on, but you have good advisors, good friends. Like I'm so grateful for Larry Summers, who, I cajoled, to join the board with me and he's been just an amazing partner. And so when you're like really unsure about a decision, who do you call? And you need those people, and you need the right people, because if you're dealing with something quite sensitive and confidential, you can't just call anybody, right? So how you surround yourselves with people to make you confident and give you confidence in complex and nuanced decisions is a big part of it. Having a good support network and family is a big part of it. But people are capable. I mean, I love reading history, and you just read about the greatest generation and serving in World War II, and you're like, I don't know if I could do that. Well, turns out all those citizen soldiers, none of them contemplated that situation. They got put into it, and many did incredibly heroic things. And you look at all the founders who end up CEOs of these huge companies, and I've seen so many people like Mark Zuckerberg sort of grow up from where they started to where they are today. I'm like, yeah, you can do it. I think it's like you could feel overwhelmed, you can do all these things, but yeah, no, like I think with the right mentorship, the right mindset, I think we're capable of a lot as people, and I certainly try to like remind myself of that in those moments of insecurity, just because I have unending confidence in humanity and just like the greatness of individuals when put in a complex situation.
When you are in the eye of the hurricane, if you will, let's say like you are negotiating Sam to come back and you go home that night, when you're all the way in it, is your tendency to work until you come out of it? Or do you have the ability to be like, okay, here's this thing. I've left it all out on the field for tonight. The thing goes over here. Like I can cook for my family or whatever. Or is that just not possible?
I try to do it, and it really depends on the thing.
Let's take this thing.
Yeah,
the OpenAI thing.
I try to compartmentalize because I do think, I wouldn't say I'm like a balanced person, but I care a lot about my family and I care a lot about my career and I don't do a lot of other things. And so, when I'm with my family, I try to be with my family. I think the more personal something feels, the harder it is. And I think this is why, the title of this show is Grit, right? Like the reason it's hard to be a founder is it's not just a business. It's not. And I think the level of when someone says something bad about a product that you made, that like your name is effectively on the door, you take it really personally. Like every founder does. And so I think when something involves sort of, I'll say, these existential issues that impact your identity, not just like the job that you're doing, it's harder. And so that's something that I think every founder that I know deals with in some capacity. Like, are you at dinner and like staring off into the void and like not really being present? And I've been that person, and every founder I know has been that person. And so you develop techniques to do it, because I do think that, human psychology is complicated, but I find, for example, if something's worrying me, the last thing to do is to try to avoid it, because that anxiety will creep in. So you need to like address it, and then you can set it aside. So I develop techniques like it, but I'm not perfect. I mean, like I'll go home and have the family dinner. Like, am I as present as I would hope I am? No, I mean, probably not. And then the more personal it is, the harder it is. But but I do think, as I said, as the first time you've encountered a situation, like let's say you're an entrepreneur and you have to terminate someone for the first time, that's really hard. As you've been in a career as long as I have, and you've done that a number of times, it's hard, but it's not. You won't necessarily take it home with you in the same way, because you've seen those people thrive in other parts of their career. You realize it's not the end of the world. You realize, hey, if I do this respectfully, this is just a hard conversation that everyone's going to get through. But you don't have that perspective the first time, And so just as you develop the battle scars, of how navigating complex situations, it helps being able to put it in a compartment and have that family dinner and, show up as a good father and a good husband. So.
Can I linger on the OpenAI thing for one more second, which is like you started and sold a company to, at the time was Facebook. Then you started another company and then sold it to Salesforce, became the CTO of Facebook and then the co-CEO of Salesforce. One was, call it kind of the social and mobile era of the world. The second was basically the godfather of SaaS, right? And cloud with Salesforce. As you think about this moment now, contextualizing all the moments that you've seen leading up to this point, how do you think about it?
I think this feels to me like the birth of the internet and the dot-com bubble. I was at Stanford during the dot-com bubble. So my undergrad was 98 to 02. So 98 was like the peak of the frothiness. Yeah. And then 02, the bubble had burst. So it's really interesting to be there through that, because, my freshman and sophomore year, you'd go into the computer lab and it was like pizza stocked by a startup, and it was everything's high flying. And by the end of it, there wasn't literal tumbleweed going through the job fair, but it sort of felt like it. And someone asked me like, how did you choose Google? I'm like, well, they were like one of the 3 companies hiring still by the time I graduated, right. And so the reason I think it is
you went straight to Google, right?
Yeah, out of my master's degree. So
right. And then you joined Marissa Mayer's APM program.
Yeah, that's right.
Also former guest of the show.
Oh, that's great.
She's a gem.
That's great.
Yeah.
So the reason why for me it feels like the internet is, I remember in 1996, 97, everyone who thought about the internet saw its impact, whether you called it antiquated terms like information superhighway, everyone sort of thinking about, you pull the thread of the connecting the world through the web and you say, okay, commerce is going to happen over this technology. Oh, and web search is probably an important concept, because as the number of websites proliferates, like how do you navigate it? And it was even obvious in the early days of portals that directory was probably going to, not scale with the scale of the internet. And then you had, things like, okay, we should be able to do payments, over the internet. And that was like a obvious idea that was hard to execute, which and PayPal emerged as sort of the winner there, and Google emerged relative to Alta Vista and all the web and Ink2Me as the winner in search. And portals, which didn't end up quite as important, but they're still around. Like Yahoo ended up dominant over things like Excite and MSN and all that. So the reason I think it's a reasonable analogy to the situation we're in now is, if you look at the capabilities afforded by large language models, the areas of the economy that should be impacted are largely shared. It's like, okay, software engineering is definitely going to change with the code generating agents. Customer service, which is where Sierra's business is almost certainly going to change because of this technology. Oh, probably content marketing's in there. Oh, and the paralegal profession or the legal profession broadly. And you start going through that, and in a group of smart people who's, deep on the technology, none of those are controversial ideas. But then the question is like, how do you actually build a great product and a platform to actually solve that problem in the most, in the best way? What PageRank was to web search. The idea of search was not novel. The idea of PageRank was. And then similarly, like, what's the right business model? Inktomi had a B2B business model in search. Google had a B2C. It turned out the latter was much, much more impactful thanks to AdWords and things like that. And then execution, like when you have a category, like I didn't follow the Amazon buy.com rivalry, but Amazon's just famously great at execution, and all those things add up. So it feels like these markets are obvious and are going to be very competitive. Like, what is the right product for these markets? What's the right team to address them? What's the right distribution channels and go-to-market model? And I think, victors write the history books, right? So, at the other end of this, we only talk about Google now. It's a verb for search. But when in 2002, probably then it might have been sort of obvious, but barely, you go back far enough and it wasn't obvious. And so that's what's exciting about it to me, is the market opportunity is large and obvious. And I think, unlike the internet, we had to wait for the world to be connected first through modems and then through broadband. Most AI solutions can be distributed on the infrastructure we've already built over the internet, over the web browser, over the mobile app stores. So as a consequence, I think the adoption of this wave of technology will be even more rapid, but it's going to be really competitive. And I think it reminds me of the dot-com bubble in that way, where, in the retrospect, it seems obvious that Google was going to win, but there was a lot of like sweat and execution that got them to that point.
Obvious and competitive tend to go hand in hand right now, where like you mentioned a few of the obvious spaces: coding, legal, customer support, where these frontier models are very clearly going to supercharge the next wave. There's like 7 companies, legitimate companies, in each of these. And, I wonder what your perspective is on, if they're so obvious and so competitive, but they are like, let's just take Harvey in legal, right? It's obviously a great use case to take this structured text and summarize it. And you have expensive paralegals that probably shouldn't be that expensive. Like, that makes a lot of sense, Same thing with customer support. Like, it's a very crappy experience. It's a delay almost always. It's multimodal across phone and text. Less of a question, more of an observation that I'd be curious to get your reaction to.
Yeah, I mean, there are examples of non-obvious ideas that turned into really big companies. Like, you could argue Facebook was one, and Twitter, now
Airbnb,
X.
Coinbase.
Yeah, and where you're really inventing something new. More often than not, though, the really, really large companies, if you look at like the top, 5 tech companies in the stock market that dominate the S&P 500, it was, making an operating system in the core productivity suite for the early PCs. It was, in Apple's case, making the PC, and then, iPhone was a very novel product. The mobile phone market was established, so it was and then you look at web search, which I put squarely in the category of obvious idea in the internet. I mean, it really was. It was billions.
There was like 20 companies.
There was like 20 companies doing it. And Amazon, we should buy things online. Like, of course, the idea to start with books was a really savvy business move. Yep. But it was, I think there's a loose, but I think correlation between total addressable market and obviousness, I think, is the big thing. And so Well, there are some really important companies that started with just like, oh, wow, this is a great idea. Like, wow, I wouldn't have thought of that. Most of the largest companies in the world are doing something that is very important and very mainstream and very widely used, like calling customer support. And as a consequence, everyone's staring at that market, as everyone should be. This is what capitalism is. So it will drive down costs and make companies with better products, better execution succeed. And that competition's, as much as I would love to be the only company in this space, it drives. This is why capitalism is amazing, right? Like, I'm paranoid about all of our competitors. We're like, we respect some products, we respect some go-to-market teams. Everyone's got different strengths, and you're sitting there every day grappling with that reality. And but I think it's because the market is huge, and I think that no company has the privilege of addressing a market that gigantic as an individual company, and the market just wouldn't enable that, right? But I think the reason why it's worth the stress of that kind of intense competition is, I think we'll probably see the first $1 trillion software as a service company come out of this era. And a pure play, like not building infrastructure and things like that. And I think the reason for it is that these AI agents actually are doing jobs rather than just adding, productivity enhancements on someone else doing the job. And I think that value is so quantifiable and so real that people will pay a lot more for it than you will a productivity enhancement. And I think similarly, I always gave this example, but the legal tech market, I think, was notoriously bad before Harvey. I can't think of one really, really large legal tech company. But it's an important profession. Don't get me wrong. It's just the addressable market of selling productivity software to lawyers. It's just a relatively small number of firms, relatively small number of seats. You just do the math in a spreadsheet. It's just like, yeah, you can make a decent company, but you're not going to make a Google out of that. But then you look at the amount the world spends on legal advice and like doing contracts for your supply chain or doing antitrust review or all these like, long tail of things that are quite valuable. And all of a sudden that market that looked modest looks gigantic. And so the interesting thing about these agents is I think it's changed the total addressable market of software because you're essentially getting into labor markets. And things that used to be backwaters of software, all of a sudden, like really interesting software markets. I think that's really exciting. So I think we're going to see some really important companies come out of this era in the same way we did in the birth of the internet.
Yeah. Can I keep pulling on this Google analogy that you're using, which is like, obviously we have a history with Google. John Doerr also did a bunch of the other companies that maybe weren't the preeminent ones and then got Google and Amazon right. But Google, in this example, was not the first search engine. It
wasn't even like the sixth.
I was going to say, I don't think it was even the top 10.
Yeah.
It was like maybe 15th or 20th search engine. So like, again, let's pull that forward. It's maybe history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
Yeah.
Loosely here. I don't know. But like all of these companies that we're talking about, let's take Harvey in legal or Sierra in customer support. Cursor and Windsurf and coding, right? There's like a few categories that we're talking about here. Maybe Glean and Search, right? It's like kind of like there's like the mother of all the markets today. They're first. You're first. Do you think about it differently in what it means to be first in these markets today versus somebody waiting in the wings, waiting for the models, maybe a different breakthrough? Yeah, how do you think about that?
Let me go back to the Google analogy for a second and then answer the question, because I think the nuance matters here. I think there's a narrative that is not completely untrue that Google won because PageRank was better. A lot of search engines were reductively based on analyzing the content of the web page, which made it really prone to spam and made it really hard to figure out which of these web pages talking about this topic was actually canonical. PageRank and looking at links and basically sort of anchor links between web pages had essentially a notion of reputation and importance and credibility in addition to analyzing content, and the combination of those two just made it work. Like you could search for something and be relatively likely to hit in the top results, something that actually was what you were looking for. So it's a really important technical insight. I think some people say, okay, that was Google won because of PageRank. Yeah, well, there's a couple other things. Like Google also signed deals with all of the major portals around the world. Google powered search on Yahoo for a really long time. And you went around to almost every country and every market, so essentially Google distributed its search engine and sort of like, basically got distribution through a really effective partnership structure. Had they not, that would have opened the market to a lot of other competitors like Inktomi, who ended up acquired by Yahoo, to go into that market. Secondly, when I got to Google, I don't believe AdWords existed, but there was banner ads at the top. You could like buy a keyword, is my recollection. I might be embellishing history here. And then going to not only cost per click based ads, but the way AdWords ranked it, which was proportional to the click-through rate too, which incentivized high quality ads in addition to optimizing for sort of an auction so people could bid on those keywords, created one of the greatest business models of all time. It was essentially like mapping the demand of, intent on the internet to the supply of people who could fulfill that intent in a very efficient auction. And so then you look at the Inktomis of the world that were licensing their technology to portals, and you realize at that point, the Google's business model was just better. It was just generating cash like it's going out of style, and you just couldn't reproduce that in a B2B context. So you have the partnership strategy, you have the business model, which was really important. If Google's business model had remained selling that yellow enterprise search appliance, it would not be the company it is today. It wouldn't have been able to finance things like Google Maps that I worked on. Yeah. You wouldn't have had a business model to support that. All of it's important. Business model, distribution strategy. Google's costs were much lower than a lot of competitors, because we built our own data centers and the cost to serve was like meaningfully lower. All those things mean you can just do different things with your technology or product. Okay, so now let's go to the AI market. How you price matters. Are you charging based on consumption? Are you charging for outcomes? Are you charging just a site license to use the product? That matters a lot. And because, my intuition and the reason why Sierra does outcomes-based pricings is outcomes are valuable. People know the value of an outcome. If you end up charging proportional to technology, you're probably going to end up marginally, you'll have a thin margin on top of the price of AI, which is going down rapidly, like even as we speak. Similarly, what is your cost to serve? I think that there was a lot of companies that, created, 2.5 years ago where they went into places like Kleiner and said, we have all these great AI researchers, we're going to train our own models because we're really smart. Well, it turns out that spending, tens of millions of dollars to train your own model when the foundation model market is sort of commoditizing turns out to be a really unintelligent use of capital, at least in the applied AI market. Most of those companies have been consolidated now at this point. You just can't have the business model of a pharmaceutical company where you spend all of your capital and license it out. And so, and then similarly, like what is your go-to-market model? Is it product-led growth? Is it a developer motion like Cursor? Is it an enterprise software motion like Sierra? That also impacts your cost to book. It impacts what parts of the market you're able to address. And it also impacts things like attrition when new people come around. The reason why Google was able to overtake Alta Vista was you just visit a new URL. It's really easy. That's always been Google's argument, for when people say they have a monopoly. It's like, just go to a different search engine. They're not completely wrong on that, right? And in contrast, if you look at, say, a large ERP deployment, it's hard to rip out an ERP system. Every large company in the world has had these like multi-year ERP system replacements. And that's an example of like a market that's like slow to address, but very low attrition when you address it. So I think all these things matter. So I don't think like a first mover advantage on its own is a sustainable advantage. And in fact, if you look at the .com era, it wasn't always, maybe even less likely if you're the first mover. But I don't think it's causal necessarily. I think that what really matters is like, what is your sustainable sort of like technology point of view and advantage? What is your go-to-market model? How do you manage your customer relationships? What is your business model? I think like a pricing model, and I think all of these things matter. The fun part about new technology is, we didn't have cost per click ads in the early days of the internet, and now it's pervasive. Now you can even do conversion-based ads and things like that. I think the exploration going on in the industry on like our approach to outcomes-based pricing is really novel. It's new. I think it's a really good idea. We'll talk in 10 years and I'll tell you whether it was actually a good idea.
I don't think it's going to take that long to know. I think we'll find out sooner.
And
outcome-based pricing meaning?
We charge when our agents autonomously resolve the problem, and it's free otherwise. And we do that so that at Sierra, our business model is aligned to your outcomes. It's very new, and it's very much like the difference between impression-based ads and cost per click ads. These are things that excite me right now, is I think we're going to find some key conceptual ideas that are hard for incumbents to copy, maybe give you a different angle than your competitors. And I think just like the narrative I had around Google, which is probably at least half right, on why they succeeded, with the benefit of hindsight, we'll know which of those key insights were actually like the meaningful ingredients to winning in these really big markets.
Yeah, it is interesting to see it play out. Like you're riding on the wave of the frontier models, right? And so you have OpenAI and XAI and all of them, right? They're all pushing. And we're having this conversation. I was having it with one of my partners, Ev, yesterday. He was like, I don't really use Perplexity anymore. And I used to live in it. And he was like, everything is now just in ChatGPT. Like they were first. And it turns out like all of the things that people thought you were going to build on top of ChatGPT is just going to build in many ways. And now that they have memory, a founder that I was with in New York last week was like, I think this is going to be the stickiest piece of software like ever. If that all plays out, it's right now consensus is all of a sudden in the valley that OpenAI is a runaway train because they have all of these first mover advantages. I don't know. We'll see. Super interesting.
Well, if OpenAI is synonymous with AI for most of the world, it's the Kleenex of the facial tissue market, and you combine that with what, obviously I'm totally biased, but I think by far the best models and by far the best product in ChatGPT built on top of it with memory, web search, deep research is a mind-blowingly great product. I don't know if you use it much, but just amazing. It's like having a full-time intern working for me. It's just amazing.
Deep research plus memory.
Yeah.
That's the like killer combo for me.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my gosh. Like you can go do all of this reasoning work and it's coupled with all of my personalized, contextualized history.
Yeah.
It's like magic.
It's amazing. And I think broadly, I do think ChatGPT will be the enduring consumer brand from the AI era. There might be more. In general, like when, like a couple years ago, someone asked me about how I thought the AI market would play out. I think I still have the same opinion, which is I think there'll probably be one, $1 trillion consumer brand coming out of it and like 10 or so enterprise software companies that are less valuable but extremely valuable. Just you can't quite, because consumer scale just produces so much value. And I think ChatGPT is that brand. I mean, it is. It doesn't mean there can't be more than one. It's just consumer is harder than enterprise, and it's much more of a winner take all market, not just because of market dynamics, but for the dynamic of like the Kleenex facial tissue thing. Like ChatGPT is synonymous with AI, and then if it's a great product, like I think it is, people come back to it. And I have the same experience. Like I always try to use everything just because I'm so curious about this, but for me, I just always go back to ChatGPT because it's just such an effective product. And it's amazing. I mean, it's amazing. I love learning things with it. I love using it as a creative foil. It's a product that's so changed the way I live. It reminds me of Google in that respect. Like I just couldn't imagine the internet before it. And I used it 100 times a day and I still use Google, but I think ChatGPT is like the most impactful technology product for me of like the past 2 decades easily.
Yeah, I agree. And if it plays out like the Google world, then yeah, there'll probably be $1 trillion company.
If you had to give up your smartphone or give up using ChatGPT and all of its competitors, like using an AI assistant, which would you give up?
Post memory, it has become a very difficult question because let me put it this way. Every day that I spend more time in these systems, let's take OpenAI as the system that I spend the most time in. Every day I get convinced that I've never seen anything like this.
Yeah. By the way, we talked about AGI and what's the meaning of it. If you talked to anyone 4 years ago and you asked them to describe AGI, we're probably beyond what people
That's
would
why I
have
don't
said.
like any of these labels of like agents and AGI, because I'm like, even this agentic thing, it's like there's already a lot of work being done on our behalf. Like where do we superimpose a line of full autonomy? I don't know. It's like, or when does autonomous for cars? It's like are we splitting hairs here?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like I've never experienced anything like this.
Yeah.
Where the more that I use it, the more that I'm like, oh my gosh, it did that. But then there's also things where I'm like, I will refresh questions with different models, and then I will re-ask the same question and get a different answer. Like there's something fundamentally that I'm not habituated to of how I interact with this thing. Does that make sense? Like there's just something.
It also feels, I always give Sam and Tim so much shit for like the naming. It's like,
get rid of
GPT-4,
the 10 models.
Yeah, like the menu of models at the top. It's comically bad, but it is I actually like it right now because the technology is immature. Ideally, you should just be able to go say something, it does the right thing, chooses the right model for the right task. I like the fact that it's not just you and me. I'll talk to family members outside of tech, and they're using these things. They have opinions on them. They're like, I tried out O3, and here's what I learned about it. I think we're all understanding the contours of these technologies. I remember growing up, and I wasn't into computer programming until later in high school, but I knew like the graphics card in my computer, and I knew what games could power it, and I understand like if I wanted to do this thing, like I understood like more of the architecture of my computer than I do the architecture of this phone.
Totally.
Because you kind of needed to like be like to use a PC back then. Like it's like in the same way in the early days of the automobile, like most people knew how to like be a mechanic basically because it would often break down to the side of the road. It's clear that like it'll feel like a vestige of the past, that the menu of models is like with 100% certainty that's not going to be something we experience 5 years from now. But I also like the fact that like we as users of this technology can kind of experience the contours of it and see the chain of thought reasoning and be like, oh, that's interesting. That's kind of gives you kind of an intuition how it works. I'll give you one really kind of, it's going to sound like a not related thing, but I think it's related. One of the things when Clay and I started Sierra, we were saying the first time an AI agent that is performing customer service on behalf of one of our customers hallucinates something, how are they going to react? Are they going to expect that the technology is perfect 100% of the time? Because no matter how good, and we're really proud of our guardrails and knock on wood, haven't had a social media moment with our platform yet, it's still a non-deterministic technology. Like you can't promise that it'll never do something wrong. Even by the time our first agent launched, ChatGPT had become so popular that everybody in the executive team at every company you work with had experienced hallucinations. Like there was the famous like lawyer who made up the case law, and I think it was Air Canada that like made up a bereavement policy. And so when we were explaining the risks of these technologies, they're like, oh yeah, I get it. It's almost like explaining that occasionally your phone freezes and you need to restart it. And I was like, wow, in like 6 months of this technology existing, everybody in the executive team of all these mainstream brands understands like the nuances of its idiosyncrasies and what could go wrong. I think that's great because as society grapples with the impact of AI, for example, what level of decision-making and agency should we afford in AI around customer service? That might be a simple question. What about making a financial decision? What about making a decision in something related to national security? you almost need the accumulation of all of this like intuitive understanding of the contours of the technology that isn't just relegated to the technology industry, but actually society writ large, so that we can have a conversation about the collective risks. I always like to say, like, the main reason GPT-8 will be safe is because GPT-1 through 7 were safe through responsible iterative deployment, and we as a society grapple with the impact. Right now, it's things like hallucination, but there's things like how sycophantic could the models be? Like, when does that cross a line of inappropriate, jailbreaking, all those things? There's so many nuances we need to grapple with as a society when you apply this to like real world situations. I think it's great that you have that silly drop down selector, so you can actually get a sense of like, why are these models different from each other? How does that change my opinion of this technology? And I think that will actually accumulate to better societal decision making over time.
It reminds me a lot of, like, I grew up in the cloud security industry. My operating career was when AWS was basically serving Capital One and a few other companies like Airbnb and a couple tech companies. And I remember the transition happened over maybe 2 years, where the overwhelmingly obvious value that came from the public cloud was so much more dominant than all of the headlines around S3 buckets. Like, it reminds me so much of someone leaves an S3 bucket open to the internet, and then they find all sorts of unencrypted data in there.
Yeah.
And there was headline after headline. The DNC in 2016 got hacked with an S3 bucket. It was like one after another. And we like grappled with that as an industry, but it didn't slow down the inevitable at all. Like, this wave was coming, and that took 2 years. And this just feels, to your point, like it's like 4x more compressed of a timeline than the previous version. It's kind of a weird analogy.
No, but it's the same. And it's like, it's just interesting. I think it's such a compelling technology that everyone's like diving into the deep end and understanding it, and almost more receptive to its imperfections than I would have imagined. Because I think about it, like, computers, since you and I started, were really fast rules engines, basically with storage attached, and if you look at the entire software engineering industry, it's how many nines of reliability can you get, and the software development lifecycle and the testing methodology. It was designed to make things more reliable, more predictable. And there's, the idea that the same input could produce different outputs, and that's the way the system was designed, is like so foreign to those of us who grew up in this industry. And we've now absorbed these new technologies so quickly, and I think it's fun. I think it's interesting. As you said, I think people have really understood the imperfections, and I think it's important that ChatGPT exists so that like everyone in the world has had it say something silly and obviously wrong and be like, so it's like super intelligent in some ways and totally idiotic in others.
Totally.
And that's an important intuition for all of us to have when you're using this technology.
Yeah. It's also why things are so competitive in the market right now, because it's like, if you went off on an island and spent a week in one of these tools, very quickly, I think you'll come to the same conclusion that we come to, which is somehow this might be still underhyped and underrated after you spend literally a week in it.
I agree. It's, to me, I might have borrowed this from a talk, but I can't remember which one. But, we're basically going from making something scarce and making it abundant. We did it with power. We did it with transportation. We did it with food, at least in most parts of the world. And now we're doing it with intelligence. And I think that if you look at the impact of like electrifying the world, you look at the impact of, making food production the way it is now, like what percentage of society worked in agriculture 300 years ago versus today, or 200 years ago versus today. And then, I just think we haven't actually absorbed how impactful that will be. And I think it'll be largely great. There's definitely going to be some, as with all technologies, downsides, but how amazing is that? And it's hard for me to imagine a world where I can't, go to the supermarket and get the food I want. it was just like, it's hard to imagine to go into a room and not be able to just flip on a light switch to have the lights go on. I think, tens of years from now, it'll be hard for people younger than us to imagine a world where intelligence is not abundant. And I think that's like a really kind of mind-blowing thing to think about.
Can you tell me about the 3 martini lunch experiment that you did at FriendFeed?
How did you learn about this?
So I went deep in the archives.
Yeah. So, oh my God, Paul Vuhait can maybe correct me, but so we were 12 people at FriendFeed, so very tight knit, and we ate lunch together every day. And it was right when Mad Men was really popular. And if you remember that show, they just drank like fishes. So like it was just like, and so you couldn't help but talk about it just because they're in the office and we got in a debate. We went to, there's this Mexican restaurant kind of near, we had rented this like kind of cavernous warehouse in Mountain View near the Caltrain station, and went to our favorite Mexican restaurant. We had this like relatively heated debate. They're like, there's no way like you, Paul, could like drink 3 martinis and do anything after lunch. And like, I can't remember whether it was Casey or Anna or me, but like, we were like, oh, no, I bet I could. So there's only one way to settle that bet. So we went first, in this day and age, it's hard to find a place that serves martinis at lunch.
Right.
So we found a steakhouse in Mountain View. We went, I don't think most people made it through more than 2 martinis. I'm proud to say I did all 3. And then we went back and tried to see who could commit code, which is not, I wouldn't endorse this for future generations. I did get a commit in. I was sleeping on the couch later. But I think Casey won the bet though, but I can't remember the conditions of the challenge. So I can't believe you knew about this. I think a lot more people know now, but that was the reason. And it was just a stupid startup bet where we just thought, how productive can you be? I don't remember the commit it was.
That is so funny. And how long, like, I guess, do you think of that company as a success or not?
Not really, no. But it's interesting because I do think it is a capsule of what makes Silicon Valley so great. I will meet people to this day who will talk about how much they loved FriendFeed. They'll talk about what we did. I'd say in addition to the like button, which we were at least sort of credited with inventing, though candidly, a lot of social services had similar affordances, but because we did it in the feed and we were sort of a Silicon Valley darling at the time, we get a lot of credit for that. We also were the first real-time social network, so it meant that you didn't have to refresh the page. So as people commented, it would stream in, and that was really impactful to the industry. And to this day, people will talk about those things and say, God, you guys were so innovative, like, congratulations. You know?
Facebook adopted, when they bought you, they adopted the like button. Is that right?
A little bit even before, like there was, everyone was looking at like from Tumblr to us.
Right.
Was looking at everybody else. So some before, some after. What was neat about it is, like, I always use this analogy, but like if you started a hedge fund in New York and it was a financial failure, but you had some really good ideas, my guess is you don't go to like a cocktail party in Manhattan and they're like, you had some really good ideas. Congratulations on your financially unsuccessful hedge fund. But I don't encounter anyone who's kind of in Silicon Valley who doesn't view FriendFeed as at least partial success, because it was a very innovative product and company. We got acquired and the employees, we all did reasonably well as a consequence of that acquisition. Very grateful to Mark and Facebook for that. And so it kind of turned out, like, we innovated, we moved the proverbial, we innovated and we changed the way people conceived of social software. It was a good financial outcome for everyone. So by Silicon Valley standards, it was a success.
Yep.
Even though we were basically popular in Turkey, Italy, and Iran, we had $0 of revenue and 12 employees. But that is something.
And some good stories.
And some great stories at a 3 martini lunch. And I think that's great, that even though I don't think objectively it was a successful company by any meaningful measure, in Silicon Valley, that is a form of success. And I think it's the reason why folks like me started a second company, because we innovated, we clearly had a good product culture, we clearly had great ideas. And that meant when I went into Peter Fenton at Benchmark the next time, he was like, yeah, I'm in.
Yep.
It was not even a question.
Yep.
And I think that's great, because I don't think people always ask, like, how do you reproduce Silicon Valley in place X. So I'll say like, what's the next Silicon Valley? Access to capital is important. Access to talent is important. I do think the way Silicon Valley conceives of what is success and failure is very nuanced and very different. And I think the not just second chances, but actually just having more nuance with how we think about failure is so uniquely Silicon Valley. And so it gives, I think it like it makes us take bigger risks in a really positive way. And I really love that part of our culture.
I totally agree. When you joined Facebook, did people make money because of the appreciation of the Facebook stock?
Both. It was a
decent outcome.
It was a decent outcome, and certainly Facebook's success afterwards.
This was like early 2000s.
Yeah, and in fact, it was sort of during the financial crisis. It was a particularly good time to get Facebook equity.
It was depressed.
Yeah, it was depressed.
That makes sense.
So part of it was just like for 12 people and who didn't have that much money, it was great.
Totally. How old were you?
I was 28, I think, 27. Yeah.
How long did it take before you became the CTO of Facebook?
I think like a few weeks.
A few weeks?
Yeah.
And how big was the company at that point?
I don't know, maybe 1,000? Yeah.
1,000 people.
Yeah.
And you're the CEO of a 12-person, like,
But it was a really cool 12-person.
By your definition, like, unsuccessful startup. And then you join Facebook, and then within a few weeks, Mark makes you the CTO. First of all, did you I don't even know how to approach this line of questioning. Number one, how could that happen? Like, how did
you have so little faith in me.
How did the antibodies of change not swallow that decision up?
So the preceding part of my story was I had been at Google for a little under 5 years, so 4.5, 5 years, and I was part of the team that made Google Maps, and can
I interrupt you here?
Yeah,
because I think you're being modest. You rewrote Google Maps in a weekend because you thought it sucked.
That is a mostly true story.
Okay,
I'm happy to go through that story. So I had experience with a really well-respected technology company at a larger scale and had helped create some pretty meaningful products there. So FriendFeed was my first, time in the proverbial arena starting a company. So when I got to Facebook, it wasn't just my FriendFeed experience. I think it was like, on my resume, it was also the Google experience. And also, I feel actually really blessed to have ended up there because there's a few idiosyncrasies that were specific to Facebook that I think with the benefit of hindsight, I really appreciate. One was, it was a very young company. Facebook had just transitioned to let, I think, anyone sign up right around the time that we joined, not just college students. And as a consequence of that, though, most of the people who worked there had used Facebook at college. And it was relatively hard to convince someone who had never used Facebook before to work there. It's a consumer service. So people are used to this at enterprise software companies, but it's the thing for college kids. Like people didn't, although I think Snap probably went through this too. I imagine, I haven't talked to Evan about it, but I imagine it's similar. When you have something that is like, you feel like it's a different generation. So despite being, 28, 29, when I became CTO, I wasn't exactly like inexperienced, relatively speaking.
Right.
In fact, I was often one of the more tenured people in the room. So that was just a quirk of Facebook that I think ended up helping. And then FriendFeed, despite not being a successful business by any objective measure, we were thinking about the same problems. And I think Mark is a famously first principles thinker, and I think we respected each other intellectually. And so I, had built teams at Google and built a startup, and we really were compatible intellectually. So, the other thing that I really tried to do is like embrace being a part of Facebook. Like I've been acquired a lot of companies, and that identity shift is really hard for people to make. And I really quickly was like, I was grateful to be there, and I like sort of took off my FriendFeed hat, virtual, and put on my Facebook one. And I think that probably helped with the transition as well. Like I was very much a part of the team there. So.
What do you mean that identity shift is hard?
I think it's having acquired a lot of companies over my time at Google, Facebook, and Salesforce. one of the hardest things is like you go from being the founder of your company to, if you get acquired, being an employee. And I think you see it play out in a lot of different ways. Like, we want independence, we want to operate this way, we want to keep our brand, and we want our own hiring standards, we want this. And any one of those things might be fine. The sum of all of them usually is a emotional response to just losing the identity that you have from being your company. And in particular, the uncomfortable thing that people don't always talk about is most people don't choose to be acquired. The founders often do, the people who made the decision, but most of the employees made a decision to work for company A, not company B. And so, and often, by the way, if it's an acquisition, they're probably in a related market. Might even be slightly competitive. It depends on sort of market. So you not only have employees who didn't choose to work for the acquiring company, but often maybe even made the decision not to work at that company, to work at the startup. And so you end up where, like, you might have a great high functioning team with a really unique technology and all these things, but so much of that success isn't just like some, PowerPoint presentation on the synergies, but actually, like, how do you take this company and make it a team? And how do you actually take the individuals there and have them identify in a way that isn't mercenary, but actually, sort of, missionary on the, like, I'm a part of this company and happy to be there. And most don't make the transition. I mean, most founders stay at companies for relatively modest amounts of time. And that can be okay. By the way, it's sometimes healthy, actually, if you can't make that transition. But, when you ask sort of like the antibodies and all that, I think if I had shown up resistant to the Facebook culture, I think it would have been a different story. And I tried not to be, just recognizing that I respected the company a lot. Like, it was the not nearly as big as it is today, but we thought it was like the best company in the space. And I wanted to learn from the culture in the company. And I think that authentic embracing of the culture probably helped.
How long were you there for?
Not long, 3.5 years, something like that.
That's a decent amount of time. You don't think that's very long?
The shortest I've ever been anywhere.
Post-acquisition, you're saying? Or just in general?
Just in general, yeah.
3.5 years.
Yeah.
And by the time
Maybe 3 years, yeah. But it's not less than 3, but I don't remember the exact
And
number.
you left to go start another company.
That's right.
And B2B company.
Yeah.
Nonetheless.
Yeah.
Which you've never done before.
Yeah. There's a first time for everything.
And maybe just as an aside, you are one of the least known, most impressive people in the Valley. Like, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Meaning, like, your ratio of accomplishment to well-knownness is insane. It's just, I really respect your versatility. It's amazing.
I appreciate that.
And maybe just to put a finer point on that, like, it's almost polymathic the way that you can oscillate from CEO of Salesforce, CTO of Facebook, to 12-person 3-martini lunch B2C company to B2B company. And that it's just amazing. It's amazing.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
When you go, first of all, was it just the itch, the siren songs of startups that called you out of Facebook? Because, like, being the CTO of Facebook, not Meta yet, like, in 2012, 13 was like, that's like, I mean, in hindsight, like, it's like the best job ever.
I've left a lot of jobs that other people
and like, probably the most lucrative.
Yeah, that's probably right. So it was a number of factors. So I'll say the personal part of it. I had a friend, Kevin Gibbs, who had started Google App Engine, which is what became GCP. When at the tail end of my tenure at Google Maps had an API that was quite popular. It was probably I think it was the first meaningful developer product that Google had that anyone used, other than the ads API, which wasn't really, it was used to automate ad stuff, but it wasn't like a developer community, if that makes any sense. But the Google Maps API, everyone from, Yelp to Trulia, everyone was built on it. So every time there was an engineering team who had like a 20% project related to developer, they would be sent my way. And Kevin had made this prototype of basically letting developers host applications on Google's infrastructure, which I think it was called Prometheus internally, if I'm remembering correctly it's like a long time ago. I ended up leaving right before that launch, but I was really excited about the project, and Kevin and I developed a ton of respect and affection for each other. So he would always he used friend feed, he'd send me notes, and then he had reached out to me, I'm probably get the timing wrong, call it 2.5 years into my Facebook tenure. He's like, I really want to start a company with you. And I was like, I really want to start a company with you. And I was like, but I just have more to do here. I felt a sense of obligation to Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, and cared about the place too. You sort of start to develop a lot of loyalty. And then he said, okay, I can't wait forever, but I'll wait a while. And then Facebook went public and a lot of things. And I was sort of felt like it was an okay time to leave. I wouldn't have a sense of not doing right by this team that I cared about. And then similarly, we had gone through this really awkward transition to mobile at Facebook. Now, I think Facebook's viewed as something really benefiting from mobility. There's a point when I was CTO where our iOS app had a 1.5-star rating in the App Store. We had made some bad, and I'll take full account of some bad technology decisions early on. When BlackBerry was popular and the Trio was popular and all these legacy platforms, we had this really write once, run anywhere kind of architecture that made everything work on these devices, but it was just shitty. And it was sort of and then relatively quickly, it's almost like the AI market. Things moved really fast there. It went from, there's 1 billion mobile platforms to clearly just Android and iOS are going to win. And so we ended up rewriting our apps also during my tenure. So I could at least take credit for fixing shit I played a part in making. And made a really high quality experience. Part of that, Mark and the whole exec team, Shrap, Chris Cox, Cheryl, we basically were dogfooding our own products. We used Facebook Messenger exclusively to communicate, and we posted in Facebook groups instead of using mailing lists, mainly just so that we were experiencing the pain of using our mobile products every day. That's the proverbial dog fooding.
The contours of the technology.
Exactly. And it was really effective, and we got out of that. We also did reform our business model too with mobile ads, and it was a really a growth moment for me. And it's nice to have some mistakes that you learn from, and not nice, but it's you learn a lot from those mistakes. So then, you come out of that, and I've got this engineer in Kevin who I think is one of the best people I've ever worked with. And the idea of him starting a company that I wasn't a part of just tore me up inside. And then I saw the impact. I just want to work with him. It's these people that are your creative foils. You just want.
Yeah, I have a list of Avengers in my mind that I kind of catalog of these are the Avengers.
And then the other thing is I'd seen the impact mobile had in our business, and a little bit we're talking about large language models now. I was just thinking about the impact it was going to have in all these other markets. And in particular, because of that dog fooding experience that I had, I was wow, literally 0% of the enterprise software products we're using even work on my phone. And I was this is kind of interesting as is there an opportunity here to build something for teams and for companies that, is there an opportunity to unwedge the offices of the world and the others that are built on the metaphors of the desktop and do something native here? Probably Quip was actually a reasonably successful product in that space. We did well. It was a sustainable company, unlike FriendFeed, had a lot of customers and revenue. Slack was obviously a much stronger company in the space, but I think a lot of, I don't know if you think of Slack as a mobile company, but I do think the emergence of messaging other than email would not have happened if not for push notifications in the mobile phone. So I think there's a bunch of us sort of circling around that concept, and a number of kind of meaningful companies that came out of space. But I got to start a company with Kevin, which was fun.
And sold it for almost 600 million to
750.
750.
Yeah.
To Benioff at Salesforce.
Yeah.
And
him individually.
Yeah, you sold it straight to Mark.
Yeah.
Okay, but the stories tell me, and again, whatever I read in the headlines, I'm sure is definitely true. But the stories, as I read them, were similar to you having your eye on working with Kevin someday. Mark had his eye on working with you someday.
I don't, it's actually, you can interview him and ask him that question. I certainly want to work with Mark. And I think, I think he shared the affection, but, it's a big acquisition. There's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah.
It's not just that.
And how long from acquisition to like up the elevator to the top floor of you being I guess it was like chief product officer, right?
Yeah, so I operated the Quip business unit for a year.
Yep.
It was really fun. We had a great time. We learned so much. You joked I hadn't done B2B software. Well, we sought advisors. We talked to people like you, or like, how should we structure our sales team? And then you go into Salesforce, which is, I think, unambiguously like the best go-to-market team in enterprise software. And you're like, oh man, we are idiots. It's like, I don't describe it. It's like you think you're a good painter and then you see Da Vinci and you're like, so we were just like that first year, I was like a sponge, just like, rethinking, Kevin and I just rethinking like how we did everything as it relates to bringing our product to market. And it was fun to just, really grow the business actually. And it made, I think, the whole team who worked on Quip just happy that we did the acquisition. It really like put on these like rocket boosters behind our business. And I think Salesforce has done that incredibly with a lot of acquisitions, actually. Just like MuleSoft turned into an amazing business after acquisition. So like the deal thesis worked, it was really working. And then after a year, Mark asked if I was willing to be chief product officer. The chief product officer stayed at the company, actually just wanted to transition into kind of like a different, more strategic role, less, operating as, like operating these huge teams. It's like it's a job, and so I think he wanted to take on a different role.
Definitely a job.
And it wasn't the plan at all, but I really was grateful to be a part of Salesforce. I had a really good experience that first year, and I really felt an obligation to Mark. So I was just like, I'm going to say yes to anything he asked me to do because, I wouldn't be here if not for him. And it was very personal for me in that respect. Like I was like, you say jump, I'll ask, say how high. Like, and I was really learning a lot. So was chief product officer for a few years, I think. I can't remember the exact number, and then became chief operating officer for a couple of years, and then co-CEO.
Okay. You don't have to answer this, but like, was the plan to be the CEO?
Not my plan, certainly. I don't want to speak for Mark. Like he might have had some plan in his head, but I don't know. I had actually not planned on staying there as long as I did. Not at.
How long was it net? 7 years?
7 years or so. Yeah. Not because I was like didn't want to be there. I didn't think I would find such a great career there. And I just ended up saying yes to the opportunities that Mark gave me, and then feeling a lot of loyalty to that place. And so, and then the pandemic happened right after I became chief operating officer, right after the previous co-CEO left. So I ended up sort of like thrust into probably a different flavor of the role. For anyone, Salesforce when I left had about 80,000 employees, and so like operating in a company in a global pandemic that's got 70,000, 60,000 employees is like, it's a complex job to say the least. And so I ended up just in a different, like a lot of things happened, like a global pandemic that no one predicted. So, and then, so I don't think any of it was like the plan, but you just have to sort of roll with the punches.
Okay. During all this time, you obviously make fantastic wealth, like generational money. You had mentioned earlier that when you were thrust into the OpenAI mediation, your wife was the one that actually ultimately encouraged you to go do it, maybe. As you describe your journey, you talk about your plans. It almost seems like it never goes according to plan, but you clearly plan these things out. Like you think about this very intentionally. So I'm curious, like today sitting here, what are you thinking about intentionally around that plan?
Well, I mean, I'll talk first here. Clay, my co-founder, and I, like, we want to, our plan is to make Sierra an enduring public company, and our goal is to have it outlive us. And which I think is hard to do in the tech industry. I mean, just quick aside, Facebook's first campus was Sun Microsystems campus, which had been, after sort of a long decline, acquired by Oracle. Google's first campus was Silicon Graphics, SGI's campus, which once was a great company and then was essentially renting out its campus because it had declined. There are companies like Microsoft that have gone through multiple technology phases and remain strong. IBM actually is, maybe an example of that too. I think Arviz did a great job there. It is hard. It's more likely that you actually your company was created for one era of computing, and then like the world moves on. And so that's our goal and our ambition. There's two parts that I was listening to your questions, like how much you obviously don't. You're not too rigid around those plans. I think that's true. I actually, most of the unhappiest people I know are rigidly following a plan and not observant of their own happiness or observant of the opportunities around them. And I actually think that a big part of life is recognizing when there's a unique opportunity that you didn't plan for, and asking yourself the question is like, should I change my plans? Whether that's in your personal life or your professional life. I think is the quote I heard it was Eric Schmidt to Sheryl Sandberg: if someone offers you a seat on a rocket ship, don't ask what seat, and I like that philosophy of life. Like, I do think, especially in Silicon Valley, there's just unique moments and you just have to be self-aware and aware of the market. And then the other thing is like being philanthropic. I really care about philanthropy, but I love to work. There's this Alan Kay quote: "The best way to predict the future is to invent it," and that is like my operating principle. And I want to impact the future, and I want to help invent it. And I think the idea of sitting on the sidelines and drinking a Mai Tai on a beach doesn't give me joy at all. Like,
Yeah.
I want to build, and so. After I left Salesforce, by coincidence, ChatGPT like came out right then, and we ended up having lunch. That's how we decided to start a company together. But I would be building open source software, if not running a company right now, because I just want to work in the technology and help shape it, because it's the most exciting technology of my memory, and I want to play a part in shaping how we all use it.
Maybe more of a dumb question, but it seems to me that when people reach your level of success, whatever that is, like their next company tends to be one that's like a higher calling, right? Like a pursuit that's deeply meaningful to them, right? Let's just say like Brian Armstrong doing New Limit, which is like longevity, right? Or obviously Elon and all the things that he's doing. It's like examples of these things. For you, like, it's like, I don't know, like Quip or Sierra, like it's not the thing that you probably are like the most personally passionate about ever. How do you think about like, I don't know, there seems to be this trope in Silicon Valley that is work on the thing that you're obsessed with, that you wake up in the morning. I'm just curious, like, what your reaction is to that.
Well, it's interesting because I am extremely passionate about Sierra. So, let me just start with like, I think once you've had success in your career, I think there's some people like Elon who famously like invested all of his money in his next thing. How amazing is that, right? Yeah. That take the permission of having, few money and like take more risk. And then there's some who, I think once you've been successful, it's not particularly fun to fail in public. And so there's another aspect to, I think, a lot of folks who come into wealth where you could argue it's a passion project, but I think it's also, I've noticed a lot of people I know, and I won't mention their names, but like their next thing is decidedly like lower risk.
Because they have like more reputation to lose.
Yeah. Yeah. Trust me, like every entrepreneur knows the feeling of failure, because even if your thing worked out in the end,
yeah.
When Chesky was making Obama O's at the, DNC, and literally sleeping on an airbed somewhere, it's like, it's fun to talk about now because it worked out.
Right.
But like, I bet it wasn't that fun at the time.
Right.
And then, and then you have, you see it all the time with second or third time entrepreneurs, like on social media, people sort of root for their demise. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's jealousy or whatever it is. I always root for entrepreneurs. Like even our fiercest competitors at Sierra, I'm like, it's hard for me to root against an entrepreneur. I feel a connection to, everyone who's taken the risk to start a company. And I do think that the target on your back is bigger. The expectations are higher. You can raise more money, which raises the stakes of any modest failure, even higher. So I think it's really hard. I think people don't really talk about it very much. And I think, I'm proud to put myself out there and I don't think Sierra will fail at this point. We have a pretty enduring business, but when we started, it was just, two guys on a whiteboard, as any other business starts. And I think that's really hard to do. On the passion side of it, I think that there's the consumer side of AI, there's the AGI, I'll say the research side of AI. I'm really excited. I grew a deep affection for how can you make this next generation technology not just the domain of tech companies. And I actually think that if you look at empowering products that actually, like Shopify is to small retailers, now a mom and pop shop can have just as sophisticated of a commerce platform as a big company. Those tool making companies, I grew a lot of affection for. So when I think of Sierra, why it's so exciting for me is we're helping every company in the world, not just the tech ones, make their AI agent, the one that they want. And actually, how do you empower them to do that when they don't have the same sophistication in AI that, say some company here in San Francisco has? That's an incredible challenge. And that's why I bring up things like Shopify. I really admire that company because they serve entrepreneurs.
Aren't you on the board?
I was on the board.
Okay, yeah.
On the board. I think it's stuff like that. So actually, I'm super passionate about it, and I actually love making tools for people and for businesses. And I think Quip was a form of a tool, and as is the Sarah platform. Fair. It's incredibly rewarding. Seeing, there's SiriusXM is one of our customers, and there's a team there that maintains Harmony, their AI agent, and they have the title AI architect. And I don't know if they would have had that title before us, and now we've empowered them with this incredible new technology. How cool is that?
That's really cool.
It's really satisfying.
Can I revisit briefly the point about the reputation and let me pull that all the way through it for you. You know a bunch of people, as do I, that did something amazing, and they will make up excuses why they're not doing something equally huge again. But I think we both know that deep down, the real insecurity comes from burning down all of the currency of reputation that you've built. Why do you think that people are scared about losing that? What are you losing in your mind? As you think about, all right, I go do Sierra and it doesn't work, let's just say.
Yeah.
What? Do you know what I mean? What happens?
I think we mythologize entrepreneurs. And so, if you've started a successful business, there's this sort of idea of it was your magic touch, your great decision-making. And then when you have multi-time entrepreneurs who've done multiple things, they're godlike or whatever. And it's not bullshit. Obviously, there's literally to have started two successful companies is so remarkable statistically. You deserve the praise. But I cringe a little bit at it because I'm I don't want to dissuade that person from doing a third thing, because then all of a sudden, oh, you're not batting 1,000 anymore. Was that really you, or was it the market conditions, or da-da-da? And actually, I do think, no, I get it. It's just humanity. It's like the schoolyard, but social media and the mainstream media will go around and collectively judge, judge these things. And I part of the reason I just cringe at it is I admire people who take risks, and I admire people who start companies, and I admire people who are willing to put themselves out there to fail. And quite literally, it shouldn't matter. You still have your wealth, you still have your family, you still have all the other things, but 100% you care. No one has so little vanity that they don't care when an article comes out saying, they failed, and there's a certain amount of personality. You are a failure, it starts to become your personality. So I get it. It's really hard. I thought about it when I started Quip, let alone Sierra. And you have to overcome the safety net of, before I started Sierra, that map story existed, and, Quip was a high priced acquisition, and da-da-da-da. And then you go and this is the last.
You're irrelevant again.
I could be irrelevant again, and if it fails, that's probably like the first page of the book, sort of thing. And then you just got to be like, yeah, this is I want to start a company because it's how you have an impact on the world, and I want to do it. But it's really hard to do. And I'm like the enabler though. If folks, I always am like the one, like, you've got this vision for the future, go do it, and do it the right way. Like, take that risk, build that team. There's a lot of subtle things too, though. Like, I think having experience helps in enterprise software a lot. The actually building the machine of a go-to-market engine is something that is repeatable across companies. Similarly, having an intricate understanding of like how procurement works at companies and how software is bought and sold and like the enterprise software landscape. And so I think it's why, if you look at Workday, started by, that was Anil's second company and remarkably successful. Both were really successful. I believe ServiceNow was too. I don't know the whole history of it. So if you look at all these companies, it's there different parts of the market. Being a repeat entrepreneur has some, like, your experience has a lot more value. Consumer nowadays is quite hit driven. I mean, there's some innate sort of viral growth techniques and things like that, but I think it's harder to intentionally just repeat there by like methodologically, replicating, your lessons from the past.
Is there anything that has most surprised you that you feel like is not what you expected it to be or let you down, having reached the success that you have? Whether it's the street cred that you thought you would have and what that means for your identity and ego, whether that's the money, whether that's the technologist that you thought you would be that you ended up not becoming, whether that's the houses you get to own everywhere. Is there something that you imagined, you daydreamed about, like when you were younger, that now being there, you're like, oh, that's absolutely not what I expected?
No, I mean, my life has exceeded my expectations and I'm very grateful for it. And I have a very open mind. So I probably have been surprised by things, but I always try to recalibrate. I try not to have sort of an ossified view of what life or the future will be like. And I'm a very curious person. So I'm certain I've been surprised at things, but my reaction is not, oh my gosh, it's like, tell me more, And
Totally.
So, I do think it is something that is, I see in like people like Patrick Collison, who's got to be like the most curious person I've ever met. I try to I might be 1/10 of him, but I have that personality. Surprise is like not quite the emotions, like curiosity. And I'm constantly like recalibrating my priors.
Maybe one more question and then I'll get you out of here. Like, you had mentioned this idea of sitting on the beach would kind of drive you crazy. When you're away from work, does it drive you crazy?
Yeah, not drive me crazy. I mean, like if I'm doing something with my family, it's amazing. But if I just have a free weekend, I'll work. And I'll, or I'll write code or develop a project, or I'll cook a meal. I like building things and doing things. So it's a blessing and a curse.
When you cook a meal, do you listen to anything?
No.
It's just quiet.
Yeah, I'll chat with my kids or something. But
Yeah.
For me, I like making software for similar reasons, like making meals. I like making things for people and having them enjoy it. And so for me, cooking a meal and eating a meal is like a social process. You do it for the people you love and you do it as a collective. And I just love the whole process.
I do too. It's also like active, you're using your hands, you're thinking about what you have to do.
Totally.
Even the grocery store is like part of the process for me. Go to the grocery store, get some food.
Yeah.
And then, I'm always like, I always do the like, oh, this one's not as good as usual. I always have to like,
qualify it.
Yeah.
You always care more than your guests.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. I appreciate you doing this. I really do.
Thanks for having me.
Is Sierra hiring?
Sierra's hiring. We're hiring in San Francisco, New York, Atlanta, and London, across all departments. So core engineering, agent engineering, go-to-market, operations. So all of the above. We're growing like a weed and growing in all markets.
Last one, I ask every guest, when you hear the word grit, what do you think of?
like mental resilience. Like that's what I think about. I think the ability to overcome meaningful setbacks, and so when I hear the word, I was like relive my own, but I love the word.
Thank you. I can't wait to do this. Maybe not 10 years, like maybe every few years.
Yeah,
we can revisit
Yeah.
your progress.
Yeah, sounds good.
And see how things are going. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you.
That's it for now. If you like the episode, please leave us a review or go back into the archives where we've done more than 200 episodes with some fantastic folks. This podcast is a Kleiner Perkins production, and I'm Joubin. Thanks for listening.